Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tales, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The rain began softly, like a shy knock at the window. It wasn't a storm, not the kind that rattles rooftops or stirs trees into shouting. No, this was the kind of rain that seems to breathe with you, slow, steady, patient. The kind that fills the quiet spaces in a room without asking permission. Somewhere in that rhythm, a warm blanket waited on the bed, folded neatly, holding the faint scent of detergent and sunshine. It was the kind of blanket that remembered things: Sunday mornings, old laughter, and the weight of someone once sitting beside you, just breathing. Outside, the world turned silver. Streetlights softened behind mist. The window glass caught reflections of light, like tiny moons, trembling with every drop that fell. It was the kind of night that didn't ask for music, because the rain already knew the melody. A soft lamp glowed on the bedside table, honey gold, spreading its warmth over the corners of the room. The curtains swayed a little with the wind. On the wooden floor, a pair of wool socks rested beside a small rug. Everything was still, except the rain. You pulled the blanket closer, feeling the first wave of warmth climb gently along your skin. It wasn't just fabric. It was memory. Maybe someone once gave it to you, or maybe you bought it on a day you promised yourself to rest more. Either way, it held something sacred, the quiet weight of care. The kettle in the kitchen gave a small sigh. Steam curled in the air like breath on a cold morning. Soon, there would be jasmine tea, light, floral, comforting in the simplest way. Tonight, nothing needed to be achieved. There were no lists, no clocks, no screens demanding your eyes. Just this: rain, warmth, and the slow miracle of being alive. You leaned back against the pillow, and the sound of raindrops on the window seemed to follow the beat of your own pulse. They fell in little syncopations, like soft footsteps pacing the roof, whispering stories of rivers and clouds, of faraway seas that once met the sky. You didn't have to listen too closely. The rain would speak anyway, in a language older than words. You could feel it then, the smallness of your worries, shrinking beneath the steady rhythm outside. You realized how the rain never asked the earth for permission to fall. It just did. And somehow, everything grew because of it. Maybe, you thought, peace wasn't something to chase. Maybe it was already here, in this dim room, in the soft hum of night, in the comfort of a blanket that has seen both your sorrow and your sleep. Maybe peace was simply the permission to rest on as the rain continued its gentle drumming. You shifted under the covers. The warmth deepened, and the air felt heavier, in that good sleepy way that happens when the world outside fades to a hush. You closed your eyes. For a moment, nothing existed except the scent of jasmine rising faintly from the cup beside your bed, and the soft percussion of water touching glass dot. It's strange how even a quiet night can hold so much. The memories, the thoughts, the gratitude for things so small they often go unseen. A blanket, a lamp, a roof, a sound, all of it tiny, perfect reasons to feel safe. Outside, a car passed through the wet street, its tires hissing like whispers. Then it was gone, leaving only the rain, endless and forgiving. You smiled, not because of anything grand, but because everything, for once, was enough. And as you drifted closer to sleep, wrapped in warmth, you thought about how the rain didn't need to be understood to be beautiful. It just needed to fall. And maybe you didn't need to fix everything tonight. You just needed to breathe. The rain agreed. The lamp's glow lingered in the corners of the room like a soft memory, as if it had watched over countless quiet nights before this one. It painted the walls in amber and honey, wrapping every object: the mug, the books stacked unevenly on the table, the folded sweater on the chair, in a hush of warmth. The world outside was cold, silver, restless. But inside, time had slowed to a pulse you could almost see. The light breathing softly across the blanket. The rain tracing lines down the glass like slow tears that never reached the sill dot. You turned your head toward the window. Raindrops gathered and slid in uneven paths, sometimes joining, sometimes parting. Tiny travelers with no destination except downward. Streetlights shimmered through them, splitting into fragments, scattering light the way good memories scatter through time dot in the kitchen. The kettle had grown quiet. The air still held the faint scent of jasmine, sweet and clean. You cradled the cup in both hands. The heat pressed against your palms, steady and grounding, reminding you that warmth was not only a temperature, but a language. For a long while, you just sat there, wrapped in that golden silence. The hum of the rain, the lamp's soft breathing, the cup's weight in your hand. All of it felt like small conversations happening without words. Each sound and flicker said, "You're here. You're safe." You took a sip, and the warmth bloomed across your chest. The tea was just right. Not too hot, not too cool, like the gentle balance of being cared for. You let the flavor rest on your tongue, floral and faintly sweet, then let it go. The rain carried that moment away, as if tucking it into its rhythm. The chair creaked as you leaned back, and the blanket followed, molding itself to your shoulders. You looked around and noticed things you hadn't before. The slow dance of shadows across the floor, the tiny specks of dust glowing like stars in the lamplight, the sound of your own breath joining the rain in its soft repetition dot. It struck you then how rare it was to feel this kind of stillness. The world beyond your window ran on speed, emails, schedules, endless updates. But here, within these few walls, everything moved like a lullaby. The rain outside didn't rush to fall. It didn't ask to be noticed. It simply existed, and somehow that was enough. Maybe that's what peace really was. Not silence, but gentleness. The kind that lets every sound, even the smallest drip from a roof, belong. You let your mind drift. The day behind you had been long, full of things unfinished, words unsaid. You thought of a few faces you hadn't seen in years. The way laughter used to sound in the same room that now held only your quiet. But there was no sadness in it tonight. Only gratitude, soft and real, for the fact that you could remember it all. Sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing the past, but from holding it gently, the way you hold this cup, this blanket, this night. The rain deepened, a low whisper turning into a steady hymn. You could hear it brushing against the roof tiles, weaving through the leaves of the old tree outside, pooling softly in the street below. It felt as though the whole world was being washed clean, layer by layer, that you placed the empty cup on the table, the faint clink of porcelain sounding almost like a punctuation mark, the end of a sentence the rain had written for you. Then you pulled the blanket tighter, letting it cover your shoulders, your hands, even your heart. The warmth returned, slow and steady, as if it had always been there waiting for you to notice. And when you finally lay down, the room felt smaller in the best way, like a cocoon. The lamp dimmed, the rain hummed, and you could almost hear the night whisper, "You've done enough. Rest now." You exhaled. The blanket moved with your breath, rising and falling in rhythm with the rain. The world outside could wait. For tonight, this was all there needed to be: a warm light, a quiet heart, and the sound of rain. The kettle began to sing the way rain sometimes does. Not loudly, not in a rush, but as if a soft line were being drawn from one quiet to the next. Steam lifted in a pale ribbon, curling into the kitchen air, fogging the edge of the small window where raindrops kept their patient travel down the glass. You reached for the handle, felt the gentle weight and warmth, and for a second just watched the swirl, the way steam rose and vanished, like a thought that had finally learned to let itself go. You poured the water over the tea leaves. and the room answered with a fragrance so clean and kind, it felt like a blessing spoken in a whisper. Jasmine, not the kind that shouts of flowers in daylight, but the soft, night-blooming kind, almost shy, almost secret. The cup warmed through the ceramic, seeping into your palms, and your shoulders eased. It was a simple miracle, really. Water, leaf, heat, and time. 4 small things, each asking nothing, but to be exactly what they are. You carried the cup back to the bedside table, careful, steady, as if every step were part of a quiet ritual. The lamp's honey light pooled around the saucer, turning steam into a silver veil. Outside, the rain kept the tempo, a low, even hush, 1,000 tiny instruments playing a song your body already knew by heart. You wrapped both hands around the cup and closed your eyes. There was relief in that first careful sip, warmth unfurling along your tongue and down your chest, settling like a shy animal finding a place to rest. The jasmine note lingered and then widened, a soft meadow opening within the night. You felt the day's weight loosen, not because anything had changed, but because something gentler had entered to carry a corner of it. Tea can be a conversation with silence, you realized. No answers required, no explanation demanded. Only presence, only breath, only the small patience of waiting while heat and leaf and time become something soothing you can hold. You thought about the first time you tried jasmine tea, how you were younger then, and everything bright had to be brighter. You didn't understand quiet flavors. You chased fireworks in every cup. But tonight, the subtlety itself was a comfort. The flavor didn't need applause to be true. It just needed a moment, and you had finally learned to give it one. The blanket shifted higher along your shoulders. The cup warmed your fingers, and the steam traced tiny ghosts into the air. It felt right to slow down, to listen for the small sounds. The tea settling in the cup, the thread-like creak of the chair, the faraway hush of tires through wet streets, the rain writing its steady script on glass. Every sound was soft enough to share the room. You took another sip and let your mind drift to the people who taught you gentleness without naming it. A hand that once placed an extra blanket at the foot of your bed before winter nights. A friend who always refilled your cup before you noticed it was empty. The neighbor who left a small paper bag of lemons by your door when your voice was sore. Little things, but your heart made a home out of them. Gratitude moved through you, not as a list to be checked, but as a warmth, the same way tea moved. Quiet, constant, generous. You set the cup down and watched the ring of light pool around it. You liked how ordinary it looked. A cup, a saucer, a spoon that had known 1,000 circles in 1,000 quiet kitchens. There was no perfection here, and that was the point. The spoon had a tiny scratch near its curve, the saucer a faint chip on the rim, the cup a glazed bubble you'd never noticed until now. These small flaws felt almost tender, as if the objects themselves had learned to be soft with time. Rain tapped more surely now, but never hard. It was as if the sky knew you were listening and decided to speak in steady syllables, careful not to hurry. The room, in return, gave its own reply. Lamplight held steady, blanket kept warm, the faint scent of jasmine repeating the sentence the rain began. You felt yourself breathing with all of it. In, out, steam lifting, drops falling. Warmth settling dot it occurred to you that sleep often arrives like tea, not by forcing it to come, but by preparing a place for it. You had prepared yours without meaning to, a room gentled by light, a blanket that remembered, rain for a lullaby, and in your hands a small comfort offering itself one sip at a time. You lifted the cup again and tasted patience. You tasted nights when you had been brave without knowing it, mornings when you kept going because the kettle still boiled, afternoons when a quiet minute on the edge of a bed had saved the rest of the day. You smiled at the window as 2 drops merged and became one, their joined path clear and unhurried. Maybe everything important was teaching you, in small ways, to join what could be joined and let go of what could not. There were unsent messages folded somewhere in a drawer, plans that had gone a different way, names you said less often now. But none of that hurt tonight. The tea asked for a simpler attention. Could you be here? Could you feel the heat in your hands? Could you allow sweetness to arrive without apologizing for how small it is? You could. You did. When the cup was half empty, the jasmine softened further, like a dimming star. You liked it that way, gentler toward the end, as if the tea, like the day, were teaching the art of release. You listened for the click of cooling porcelain when you placed it down. The sound was almost like a dot drawn in pencil, the line of waking growing thin, the line of sleeping preparing to begin dot outside. A breeze brushed the rain sideways for a breath or two, then let it fall straight again. The tree beyond the window shook its leaves like a dog coming out of water, then stood still. You could almost hear the roots taking the gift, drinking in the dark with steady mouths. You felt yourself doing the same, drawing in warmth, drinking the night in small, grateful sips. The cup emptied with no drama at all. That felt beautiful. The quiet way something can end and leave more peace than it found. You rested the spoon on the saucer and watched a single drop gather at its tip, round as a pearl, then fall without sound. A tiny letting go, a tiny freedom. You pulled the blanket across your chest and lay back, leaving the cup within the lamplight circle, like a lighthouse for a ship that had already found shore. Your breathing fell into the rain's soft meter. You were not trying to sleep yet. You were only learning the room's kindness by heart. The night had time. The kettle would be there tomorrow. The tea would bloom again. And as the scent of jasmine thinned to almost nothing, you felt something else thicken. The gentle certainty that small things, leaf, heat, cup, water, hands could gather and make a harbor. You let that certainty lift and fade like steam, and in the space it left, rest began to arrive. The blanket was old, though it didn't look it. The fabric had been washed so many times it had learned softness as a language. When you pulled it closer, it released a faint scent of laundry soap and thyme, not the sterile kind of clean, but the kind that carries traces of stories, years of warmth, maybe laughter once, maybe tears that dried before morning. It was not just a blanket. It was the quiet witness of countless nights that had come and gone without fanfare. Your fingers traced its edges, following seams hand-stitched long ago. Somewhere, maybe far away, someone had chosen the thread, the pattern, the weight. Perhaps they never knew that what they made would someday rest here, in your hands, on a night like this, keeping you safe from a chill the room never quite had. You imagined that person for a moment, a face you'd never seen, sewing in silence, maybe humming, maybe pausing to lift the cloth and check if each line was straight. The thought warmed you more deeply than the blanket itself. Outside, the rain kept its unhurried rhythm. The sound was familiar now, as if it had always lived inside the walls, waiting for this quiet hour to emerge. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, steady, rhythmic, kind. You watched it through the window, tiny rivers sliding down the glass, colliding, merging, breaking apart again. Their paths looked random, but there was a strange grace in the way each drop eventually found its way down. You let your mind wander back through time. How many blankets had covered you before this one? How many nights had you been given comfort without remembering to thank it? Your grandmother's old quilt that smelled of eucalyptus. The blanket in a childhood room where the rain had sounded just the same. A heavy wool throw a friend handed you that one winter when the heater broke. So many small shelters you never named as miracles. You shifted beneath the blanket and thought about how people are like that too. Warm presences that arrive quietly, offer comfort, and move on before you realize how much you needed them. Perhaps gratitude was not something to speak, but to feel. The way the body feels heat through cloth. The rain deepened, its voice now more like a murmur than a song. Somewhere, a gutter overflowed and dripped in steady intervals. A heartbeat for the night. You found yourself breathing in time with it. The room felt suspended between wake and sleep, light and shadow, memory and forgetting. You closed your eyes and remembered the first time someone had wrapped you in a blanket out of care, not ceremony. You had been sick then, or maybe just tired, but what you remembered most wasn't the fever or the ache. It was the moment of being tucked in without asking. That small act of being seen. Now, years later, that gesture returned through fabric and rain, whispering that you didn't need to earn rest. You only needed to accept it. The lamp flickered, then steadied again, its glow spreading across the wall like an echo of sunlight that had traveled all the way from morning just to reach this hour. You looked at it and thought of the people who send light your way without knowing. A text that simply says, "Thinking of you, a shared meal," a smile in the middle of a long day. The world could be cruel, yes, but it was never empty of kindness. The blanket pressed against your chin, warm and reassuring. You thought about how every thread in it held a tiny effort, a hand, a choice, a moment. Gratitude welled up quietly, not as words, but as a physical thing, a pulse of warmth that rose through your chest. It reminded you of how the rain fell, steady, patient, making small things grow without asking to be noticed. You realized then that maybe the secret of peace wasn't to chase what was big or bright or lasting. Maybe it was to notice what was already here. This blanket, this cup, this lamp, this breath. The room dimmed as you turned the switch down a little. Shadows melted into one another, soft and forgiving. You listened to rain, to the whisper of fabric when you moved, to the sound of your own breathing, slowing into the rhythm of the night. The blanket seemed to hug you back. You smiled at the thought that maybe warmth could be a conversation too, just one without words. Maybe the body knows gratitude better than the mind does. Outside, the storm drifted further east, and the rain softened into mist. You imagined it moving over rooftops, fields, forests, carrying your quiet thank you into the dark. You pictured it falling on windows like yours, where others might also be listening, also remembering, also wrapped in something warm. You liked the idea that, for a few moments, you were all connected by the same sound, the soft percussion of water meeting earth. You exhaled. The blanket rose and fell with you, like a gentle tide. The world outside went on, but you were no longer in its hurry. You were where you needed to be, right here, in this room, under this blanket, with this rain. And as your eyelids grew heavier, one final thought came quietly, that maybe the truest gratitude is not spoken at all. It's lived in the way we breathe, the way we rest, the way we let ourselves be held by the simplest things. The rain answered with silence, and the blanket kept its promise. The window had become a canvas of rain, thin trails weaving together, separating, finding new paths again. Each drop carried a reflection of the lamp, a tiny bead of light sliding through the dark. You watched them as though they were thoughts, some heavy and slow, others quick to fall away. The world outside blurred softly, as if the night had decided to turn itself into a watercolor. The hum of the rain filled every corner of the room. There was no silence here, but it was a peaceful kind of sound, the kind that made you forget time was moving at all. You could almost believe that the rain existed only for you, that it had come not to soak the earth, but to soften it, to remind it how to rest. Your hand brushed the window pane, feeling the faint coolness seeping through the glass. There was something grounding about that small contrast, the warmth of your skin against the cold from outside, two sides of the same night meeting without resistance. You could see your reflection faintly, eyes half closed, hair a little messy, wrapped in the familiar comfort of your blanket. You looked both here and somewhere far away, like someone remembering rather than seeing. And maybe that's what this kind of night does. It opens a small door inside the heart, leading you back to moments you'd forgotten to keep. You remembered a childhood evening, the same sound of rain, the same warmth of being safe indoors. You were smaller then, legs dangling off the couch, watching drops race each other down the window. There had been a voice in the kitchen humming an old tune, the smell of something baking, the simple miracle of being cared for without understanding how rare it was. You smiled. It had been years, decades maybe, but the memory came with such gentleness it didn't ache. It just glowed, like the lamp beside you now. You realized that some comforts never truly leave. They just wait for quiet nights like this to return. You turned back to the room. The light flickered across the wooden floor, the small table, the empty cup now cold. The blanket rested heavily across your shoulders, its warmth familiar, earned. Every object seemed to hum the same truth. You made it through another day. Outside, the wind brushed the rain sideways, and the old tree near the window swayed slightly, as if bowing in slow rhythm. The sound of leaves against glass was soft, like an old friend tapping to say they're still there. You felt it deep in your chest, that fragile thread of connection between yourself and the world. Not the loud kind of belonging, but the quiet kind that comes when you stop trying to deserve it. You sat a little longer, just listening. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and tea, the aftertaste of jasmine still somewhere on your tongue. The rain eased, turning from a melody into a whisper. The quiet deepened. You could almost hear your heartbeat mingling with the soft percussion outside, both steady, both alive. There was a peace here that didn't need to be named. It wasn't the kind that came from solving anything or reaching anywhere. It was the kind that simply was. Like the rain, falling whether watched or not, existing whether thanked or not. You pulled the blanket higher and felt its weight along your chest, down your arms, over your knees. It felt like being held, not by someone, but by the moment itself. And in that stillness, gratitude began to rise, not loud or grand, but steady, like warmth finding its way back into cold hands. You thought of all the small things that carried you here, the light switch that worked, the roof that didn't leak, the chair that held you, the hands that once taught you how to make tea. How much of life was made of things like that? The unspoken kindnesses, the unnoticed safety, the quiet beauty that doesn't ask to be remembered. You felt them gather in you, each one a small spark, until you were lit from the inside with something that didn't need words. The rain slowed further, now just an occasional drop against the window. You leaned back, eyes half closed, body sinking into the soft gravity of rest. The lamp dimmed to its lowest glow. Somewhere between awake and asleep, you thought you heard the world whisper, "This is enough." You didn't answer. You didn't need to. Your breath was the reply, slow, even, grateful. Outside, dawn waited somewhere beyond the clouds, patient and sure. The night exhaled. The last drops of rain slid down the glass, leaving trails that caught the faintest hint of light. You would sleep soon. The blanket would keep its quiet promise. The tea's warmth would linger somewhere in your chest. And when morning came, it would find you resting, not because the world had grown easier, but because you had learned how to soften into it. And so, as the final threads of rain disappeared into the earth, you closed your eyes and whispered, barely aloud, "Thank you." It was unclear whether you were thanking the rain, the room, the blanket, or the quiet itself. But it didn't matter. Gratitude never really needs a name. The sound that followed was only peace. Morning didn't come with brightness. It arrived softly, in shades of gray and silver, the way gentle mornings do after rain. The air smelled clean, washed, new. Through the window, clouds still hung low, pale and tender. like the sky hadn't quite finished its dreaming. You opened your eyes slowly, as if not to disturb the quiet that had settled overnight. The blanket still covered you, warm from your body's sleep. You could feel its weight in the best way, grounding, familiar, the kind of warmth that reminds you you've been safe all along. The lamp was still on, but dimmed to a golden hush. The teacup from last night sat empty beside it, a faint ring marking where the heat had once been. You smiled. Everything in the room felt gentle, as though the night had folded itself neatly and left peace in its place. You stayed still for a long time, just listening. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped softly from the eaves outside, each drop marking time like a heartbeat that refused to hurry. Birds hadn't begun their morning chatter yet. Maybe they, too, were resting. The world, it seemed, was stretching, slow and content, like a child waking from a good dream. You turned your head toward the window. The glass was still traced with faint streaks of dried rain. Beyond it, the street glistened, every puddle a mirror, holding the pale face of the sky. The trees were dark and wet, their leaves trembling slightly, as though still remembering the rhythm of the storm. Somewhere down the street, a car started quietly, the sound low and careful, respectful of the hour. You pulled the blanket closer and felt the fabric breathe with you. It had become more than warmth. It was a companion now, a soft witness to your night of gratitude. The thought made you laugh quietly to yourself. Who would have thought a simple blanket could feel like friendship? And yet, it did, because it wasn't just the cloth. It was what it represented. Care, presence, gentleness. All the small things we too often overlook because they do their work quietly. You sat up slowly, letting your feet touch the cool floor. The air carried the faintest chill, but it felt clean against your skin. You reached for the empty cup, turning it gently in your hand. The scent of jasmine had faded, but not completely. A trace still lingered, soft as memory. You took it in, that small remnant, and thought of all the moments that pass like this. Short, quiet, almost invisible, yet somehow they shape who you become. Outside, a soft wind moved the curtains. You stood and walked to the window, drawing the fabric aside just enough to see the morning. The clouds were thinning. Light began to break through in slow, golden stripes. The puddles on the street caught those rays and scattered them like tiny suns. Everything glowed faintly. The rooftops, the wet leaves, even the telephone wires stretching like silver threads across the sky dot. It struck you then how beautiful ordinary things could be when you truly looked. The world wasn't perfect. It never was. But it was alive. It breathed, it shimmered, it gave and took with grace. And here you were, breathing with it. You thought of all the nights before this one, the restless ones, the hurried ones, the ones where you tried to solve everything before sleep. How heavy they had felt. How far peace seemed. Yet somehow, tonight had been different. You hadn't tried to chase calmness. You had simply allowed it to find you. Maybe that's what the rain had been trying to teach all along, that you don't have to force stillness. You only need to make space for it. Like the sky makes space for the rain, like the earth makes space to receive it. Maybe gratitude works the same way, not as a duty, but as an opening. You stood there a while longer, watching a single droplet slide down the outside of the glass. It left a trail so fine it looked like a line drawn by light. You followed it with your eyes until it disappeared into the window frame, and whispered quietly, "Thank you," again. This time, you weren't sure who it was for, the rain, the morning, or the version of yourself that had finally learned to rest. Maybe for all of them. You took a slow breath. The air was cool and alive. Somewhere a kettle whistled faintly. A neighbor, perhaps, beginning their own small rituals of comfort. You smiled at the thought. Somewhere else, Someone was cradling a warm cup, maybe looking at their own window, maybe whispering their own small gratitude into the soft gray morning. The thought made the world feel tenderly connected, as if all those quiet hearts were threads in the same gentle fabric. You turned off the lamp. The last of its golden glow folded itself into the daylight. You laid the blanket neatly at the foot of the bed, smoothing its edges, feeling a quiet affection for its softness, for its patience, for the way it had kept you safe through the rain dot then. Before leaving the room, you glanced back once more. The light, the stillness, the faint scent of tea, all of it seemed to hum with the same quiet truth, that happiness was never far away. It lived in ordinary things, in the sound of rain, in a cup of tea, in the warmth of a blanket that has seen you through another night. You stepped toward the kitchen, bare feet soft on the floor, the day beginning without rush or noise. Behind you, the rain's memory lingered, a faint hush that would follow you gently through the hours to come. And maybe tonight, when the sky darkened again, the rain would return, soft, patient, steady, just to remind you once more, that peace doesn't shout, it whispers. And you only need to listen. By afternoon, the world had fully woken, but the softness of the morning never quite left. The air outside was light and damp, carrying the faint perfume of wet earth and leaves. From the open window, a cool breeze moved gently through the room, lifting the edge of the curtain, brushing against the pages of a book you'd left half open. Everything felt slower somehow, not tired, but calm, like the hours themselves had learned to walk barefoot. You sat back down on the bed, the same blanket draped loosely around your shoulders. It had cooled now, but its comfort remained, the kind that doesn't depend on heat but on memory. You traced a finger over its pattern, tiny woven lines forming quiet shapes, and thought about how many days begin and end with the same objects, yet we rarely see them as anything but background. The cup, the lamp, the rain, the blanket, always there, asking for nothing, giving everything. You poured yourself a fresh cup of tea, not jasmine this time, chamomile. Its scent was earthier, gentler, like a whisper from the ground itself. Steam rose and met the lingering cool of the rain-washed air. You held the cup close, felt the warmth rise into your face, and closed your eyes for a moment, letting the day rest against you. It was strange how the body remembers calm once it's been found. The rain had stopped hours ago, but its rhythm still echoed somewhere inside you, quiet and steady. Every sound, the hum of the kettle cooling, the soft sigh of wind through the window, seemed to carry that same patience. Even your heartbeat felt slower, as if keeping time with something larger than you. You glanced outside. Puddles still shimmered on the street, and now and then a leaf drifted across one, spinning lazily before settling again. Sunlight peeked through the clouds in pale stripes, laying gold across the wet roofs. It was the kind of light that made even ordinary things, telephone poles, mailboxes, parked bicycles, look tender. The world was drying itself gently, the way a mother might dry a child's hair after a bath. You took a sip of tea. Its warmth traveled through you like a small thread, weaving body and breath together. You remembered a phrase you once heard: peace doesn't arrive, it returns. Maybe that was true. Maybe peace never truly leaves. It just waits until we slow down enough to notice it standing quietly by the window. You thought of yesterday's worries, the things that had filled your mind before the rain came. They still existed, somewhere beyond this quiet hour, the unanswered emails, the uncertainty about tomorrow, the weight of things not yet done. But right now, none of them demanded anything. They could wait. Life didn't vanish when you rested. It simply waited too. The sound of a bicycle bell drifted up from the street. A child laughed, bright, brief, like a bird startled into song. The moment passed, but it left a ripple of warmth in you, You smiled. How easily joy can appear, you thought, when you leave a little room for it. You leaned back, the blanket slipping lower, and watched the curtain sway. Its motion matched the breath of the wind, back and forth, an unhurried pendulum marking time, not by seconds, but by softness. The fabric caught bits of light, turning its folds into waves of silver and cream dot in that rhythm. You found yourself thinking of the people you cared about, some near, some far, some gone. Gratitude rose again, but differently this time, not for comfort, but for connection. For every soul that had shared a moment of warmth with you, knowingly or not. You whispered a quiet thank you into the room, and though no one heard it, the act itself felt like prayer. Outside, a drop of water fell from the roof's edge, glinting briefly before disappearing into the puddle below. The sound was soft, but you heard it clearly. It was like punctuation at the end of a long, calm sentence. You set your cup down and let the silence deepen. Not an empty silence, but one full of invisible things. The scent of tea, the whisper of the curtain, the echo of laughter fading down the street. Everything had its place, its own small way of existing kindly. You realized then that the feeling the rain left behind was not just peace, it was belonging. To this room, to this light, to this moment. You didn't need to go anywhere to find it. You were already inside it. The blanket slipped a little more, pooling at your elbows. You didn't pull it back up. Warmth, you'd learned, doesn't always come from holding on. Sometimes it comes from trusting that it will stay. You leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching a line of sunlight crawl slowly across the floorboards. Dust motes danced in it, tiny golden sparks moving through air like thoughts made visible. You followed their paths until they disappeared into shadow. Afternoon would turn to evening soon. The sky would shift again, clouds gathering or parting. No one could tell. Maybe the rain would return. Maybe not. But it didn't matter. You had learned something last night, something small but lasting. That gratitude can live anywhere, even in the simplest corners of an ordinary day. You finished the last sip of tea and set the cup aside. The air around you seemed to hum, low and steady, as if the world were breathing with you. You whispered again, thank you. This time not to the rain or the morning or the blanket, but to life itself. For giving you this quiet, the wind brushed your hair lightly, almost as if it had heard that evening returned quietly, as if it had walked barefoot all the way back from the horizon. The light outside turned soft again, blue at first, then gray, then a faint silver that glowed on the wet streets. You could hear distant footsteps somewhere below, slow and rhythmic, blending with the occasional sigh of a car, passing through shallow puddles. It wasn't raining yet, but the air carried the scent of it, that cool, mineral promise that always comes before the first drop. You stood by the window, one hand resting on the frame. The glass felt cooler now, and the sky above the rooftops looked like brushed velvet, smooth and heavy. Clouds moved slowly, their edges glowing where the last traces of daylight clung to them. The world was winding down again. It was as if the day itself was exhaling, ready to rest. You turned on the lamp, the same soft golden light that had kept you company last night. It filled the room instantly with warmth, a quiet contrast to the chill pressing in from outside. The blanket was still at the foot of the bed, folded neatly from the morning. You pulled it back over your shoulders and felt that familiar comfort settle around you, as though the day's noise were being gently dimmed. You sat down with another cup of tea, not jasmine or chamomile this time, but something simple, just hot water with a slice of ginger and a bit of honey. The scent rose softly, clean and warm, wrapping itself into the air like the beginning of a lullaby. You held the cup in both hands, watching the surface tremble slightly as the breeze moved through the curtains. The first drops arrived without warning. 1, 2, 3 small taps against the glass. Then a pause. Then more. Soon, the sound thickened into a gentle rhythm. The rain had returned, not with drama, but with the same patience as before, like an old friend who never stays gone for long. You leaned back, listening. The sound filled the spaces between things, between breaths, between thoughts, between the quiet hum of your own heartbeat. It was astonishing, you thought, how something as simple as rain could hold so many tones at once. The whisper against leaves, the patter on the window, the low percussion on the roof. Together, they made a kind of music that belonged only to nights like this. You took a sip of your tea and let its warmth spread slowly through you. Each breath came easier now. The day's small worries had softened around the edges, no longer sharp enough to disturb your calm. Outside, the world glistened under the streetlights, puddles reflecting gold and silver, drops racing down the window in crooked paths. You followed one with your eyes until it disappeared into the sill, and for a moment, it felt like watching time itself, fleeting, beautiful, gone too soon. You thought of how everything in life was like that, passing through, leaving traces, then vanishing. And maybe that wasn't sad. Maybe it was what made each moment precious. The rain didn't need to last forever to be enough. Neither did happiness. Neither did peace. You remembered something your grandmother once said, though you couldn't recall if it was in a dream or a memory. Don't rush through the quiet, she had told you. That's where the world whispers its kindness. So you didn't rush. You stayed. You let the rain speak its language around you. The room glowed softly, and the steam from your tea mingled with the faint mist pressing against the window. You realized you didn't need more than this. This cup, this sound, this moment that asked for nothing but your presence. Your eyes grew heavy as you watched the light flicker across the floor. The blanket shifted with your breathing. The rhythm of the rain grew steadier, more even, like a heartbeat you could lean into. You thought about the small things again. The thread in the blanket, the curve of the cup, the scent of ginger, the coolness of the window glass. You'd spent so long chasing bigger things that you'd forgotten how vast the small ones could be. You smiled to yourself, a quiet curve of lips that no one would see but the rain. Gratitude moved through you again, unannounced, the way the tide touches shore without needing to be invited. You whispered softly into the night, not for anyone to hear, but simply because it felt right. I'm here. And that's enough. The rain answered, tapping lightly on the glass, as if in agreement. You set your cup down and leaned your head against the window. The coolness met your skin, gentle, grounding. Outside, lights shimmered through the curtain of rain, some sharp and bright, others blurred into soft halos. They reminded you of distant stars, the kind you used to wish upon as a child. You closed your eyes and imagined that each drop carried a tiny wish, falling not to be granted, but to remind you that you'd already been given what mattered. The blanket slid higher around your shoulders. The air grew warmer. The room breathed with you, and the rain became your lullaby once more. You stayed like that for a long while, not thinking, not remembering, not hoping, just being. Wrapped in the simple truth of this, that peace, like rain, doesn't need to be held. It just needs to be felt. The rain lasted longer than you thought it would. Hours passed, though you didn't feel them. Time had softened into something round, like a pebble smoothed by water. Each drop fell with quiet purpose, and together they became a language the night seemed to understand perfectly. You sat near the window, the blanket wrapped close, the cup empty now, but still warm where your hands had held it. The lamp beside you burned low, its light more amber than gold, making everything look gentle and dreamlike. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth drifting in from the open window, sweet and dark, like the world breathing after a long sigh. Somewhere outside, a door closed softly. followed by the muffled sound of footsteps fading down the street. You imagine someone walking home beneath an umbrella, the rain tapping softly above them, puddles rippling around their shoes. It comforted you to think that others were sharing the same rain, strangers bound for a moment by the same sound. You rested your head against the wall, eyes half open, listening. The rhythm of the rain shifted now and then, sometimes slow and sparse, sometimes quicker, but always steady enough to keep your thoughts from wandering too far. You found yourself remembering old moments, not because they hurt, but because the rain made space for them. You remembered a porch light glowing through a curtain of rain. When you were young, how you'd stood there, barefoot, feeling the cool drops hit your face for the first time. The way the air smelled, the way laughter echoed from inside the house, the safety of knowing warmth waited just a few steps away. You hadn't thought about that evening in years. Yet now, it returned like a soft knock on the door of your mind. And suddenly, gratitude wasn't a word. It was a sensation. It filled your chest, spread down your arms, settled into your fingers. You weren't grateful for anything grand. You were grateful for this, to have lived long enough to remember, to feel, to listen. The blanket shifted as you pulled it tighter. It rustled softly, almost like a sigh. You thought of all the nights before this one, of the storms that weren't gentle, the nights that felt too low, too cold, too loud inside your head. They seemed far away now, softened by the same patience that rain gives to everything it touches. The world outside gleamed under streetlights. The wet pavement glowed like ink, and reflections of windows flickered across it. You could see the neighbor's porch light again, the same yellow glow you'd noticed nights before, unwavering, steady. You imagined someone sitting behind that light too, wrapped in their own blanket, listening to the same rain. The thought made you smile, faintly but deeply. The room had become its own small universe. 4 walls holding light, warmth, and breath. You noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock, the quiet inhale and exhale of the night itself. Everything worked together, creating a piece too complete to need words. You stood for a moment, stretching your arms, feeling how your body had grown loose and calm. The floor was cool beneath your bare feet. You turned off the lamp and left only the soft gray glow of the window to light the room. It was enough. The rain grew lighter, then paused, as if the sky itself were catching its breath. You watched a single drop slide down the glass and stop halfway, clinging there, trembling. It reflected a tiny world, the light, the blanket, the quiet. You watched it until it finally fell, disappearing into the darkness below. You thought of how every drop ends, and yet the rain itself continues. Maybe that was the way of peace too, never constant, but always returning. You walked back to the bed and sat down slowly, pulling the blanket around you once more. The fabric met your skin like an old promise kept. The air was cool against your face, but the warmth beneath the blanket felt deeper now, almost alive. You closed your eyes. The last sounds of rain drifted in, a few soft taps on the windowsill, the faint trickle from a gutter outside. Then came the quiet, rich and full. You breathed it in. You let it fill the spaces in you that once felt hollow. Sleep didn't come all at once. It arrived gently, the way the rain had, soft, patient, certain. Between waking and dreaming, you thought one last time about how small things can hold entire worlds. A sound, a scent, a touch of fabric, a memory of kindness. And as your thoughts faded into the rhythm of your breath, you realized that this simple, quiet night was enough to carry you through whatever tomorrow might bring. Outside, the world kept breathing. Inside, you did too. The rain had stopped, but its peace remained, not in the sky, not in the streets, but in you. By the time the last drops had vanished, the world outside had changed again. The streets were dark and glistening, breathing under the faint glow of street lamps. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, that clean, familiar perfume that always seems to linger long after the clouds have gone. Somewhere in the distance, a window closed, and the quiet that followed felt soft enough to touch. You sat still, wrapped in the same blanket, listening to the silence that the rain had left behind. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full of memory, of calm, of all the little echoes that come after something gentle ends. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for sound, only breath. You exhaled slowly. The air in the room was cool now, but the warmth around you remained, like a small flame that refused to go out. The lamp cast a golden pool on the wall, where shadows swayed like slow dancers. The cup on the table had cooled completely, its rim fogged faintly with traces of honey and steam. Everything felt settled, like the end of a long, kind sentence. You thought of how many nights had passed just like this one, unnoticed, uncelebrated, yet somehow sacred in their simplicity. There was something beautiful about the ordinary, about the way life offers peace, not in grand gestures, but in these quiet, unassuming hours when no one is watching. The rain had come and gone, but it had left its lesson behind. You didn't need to name it. You felt it instead, in the softness of your breath, in the steadiness of your pulse, in the way your heart no longer rushed. The world outside had washed itself clean, and somehow, so had you. You pulled the blanket tighter, letting your fingers press against its texture. It reminded you of all the small things that had carried you. The cup, the kettle, the lamplight, the rain, the countless little moments you'd almost forgotten to thank. How strange and beautiful it was. You thought that peace could be stitched from things so ordinary. Outside, a faint wind moved through the trees, shaking a few last drops loose from their branches. They fell with a sound like quiet applause. You smiled. It was as if the world itself were closing the day with a small note of gratitude. You turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room gently, not as an absence, but as a blanket of its own. The only light left came from the faint shimmer of the window, where the sky still glowed from faraway city lights. The ceiling faded into shadow, and your eyes began to adjust, finding comfort in the outlines of things you knew by heart. You could still hear the faint dripping outside. Not rain anymore, just the leftover patience of it. You let that rhythm guide your breathing, slow and steady, until your body softened again. Your mind wandered, but not far. It floated between thoughts the way leaves drift across water. You thought about kindness, how it begins small, how it multiplies quietly. You thought about how every moment tonight had been made softer by something simple. A light, a blanket, a sound. None of them demanded your attention, yet each had held you gently, the way rain holds the earth. And maybe that was the heart of it, the thing you'd been circling all along. Gratitude wasn't about counting blessings. It was about noticing them, about seeing how even the smallest comforts could build a home around your heart if you just slowed down long enough to feel them. The blanket shifted as you lay down. The fabric carried the faint scent of warmth and memory. The pillow met your cheek with familiar coolness. You felt your body melt into the bed, the edges between you and the world blurring until there was only softness. Your eyelids grew heavy. The night breathed around you, gentle and sure. Somewhere far off, a train passed, a low, distant hum that sounded almost like a lullaby. Then it faded, leaving only stillness again. You whispered one last, "Thank you," into the quiet. Not because you had to, but because it felt right. The words disappeared into the dark, absorbed by the same air that had held your sighs, your breath, your peace. The last thing you felt before sleep came was the weight of the blanket, the memory of rain and the slow, steady rhythm of your heart, the quiet drumbeat of a body at ease. Outside, the world waited patiently for morning. Inside, you rested, not because the night demanded it, but because it invited you to. And as you drifted toward dreams, you understood. Peace doesn't arrive like a visitor. It grows gently, inside the spaces you've learned to cherish. The rain had gone, but the gratitude remained. Soft, steady, eternal morning came quietly again, this time with sunlight. Pale at first, then warm. It touched the window in gentle strokes, turning the glass into a slow dance of gold and shadow. The air smelled faintly of new rain and earth, that delicate sweetness that follows a storm when everything still feels half asleep. You stirred under the blanket, but didn't move right away. For a long moment, you simply lay there, eyes half closed, letting the warmth of light mix with the faint coolness that still lingered from the night. The world outside was awake. Faint birdsong, the distant rumble of a bus, the soft murmur of life resuming. But inside the room, peace still held its breath. The blanket had slipped halfway down, and as you pulled it up again, you noticed the faint crease where it had folded around your shoulder. It was such a small thing, yet something about it felt precious, like proof that the night had really happened, that you'd been held, that rest had done its quiet work. You sat up slowly, the air brushing your skin in thin waves of morning chill. The room looked different now, brighter, but still calm. The cup from last night was empty, a few drops of honey catching the light. The lamp stood quiet and golden, like a companion politely waiting until needed again. On the window, tiny, drops still clung to the glass, each holding a spark of sunlight, each one a small world reflecting back at you. You stood and walked closer. The floor felt cool underfoot. Outside, the street glistened, puddles turning into mirrors that held pieces of the sky. A woman across the lane stepped out to water her plants, humming softly to herself. The sound drifted up to you, carried on the same breeze that moved her curtain. It felt good, hearing another person's small joy. You thought of last night, of the rain, the tea, the blanket, the silence. It had all felt so ordinary while it was happening. And yet now, as the sunlight filled the room, you realized how extraordinary that ordinary had been. It had steadied you in a way no grand event ever could. Peace, you thought, was not something you earned. It was something you allowed, like sleep, like forgiveness, like rain. You turned from the window and went to the kitchen. The kettle sat waiting, a small, loyal friend. You filled it with water, the tap whispering softly as it ran. When you set it on the stove, its metal clicked gently with heat. You watched the flame bloom blue beneath it, the tiny roar barely breaking the morning's stillness. You found yourself humming, not a tune you knew, but something made of breath and habit. The sound mingled with the kettle's soft hiss. It felt natural, like the room was joining in. When the water boiled, you poured it carefully into your cup, this time with a slice of lemon and a drizzle of honey. Steam rose in lazy curls, catching the light in ghostly shapes. You brought the cup to your lips, took a small sip, and smiled at the tart sweetness that followed. The first warmth of the day spread through you, slow and kind. You leaned against the counter, cup in hand, and let your eyes wander over the room, the soft folds of the blanket on the bed, the streaks of sunlight along the floor, the faint reflection of your own face in the window. Everything seemed touched by gentleness. You thought about the people out there starting their days, some rushing, some wandering, some lost in thought. You wished you could give them a fragment of this quiet, a piece of this peace. Maybe you could, in small ways. A kind word, a smile, a pause before answering. Perhaps peace was meant to be passed along, not kept. The thought stayed with you as you finished your tea. The warmth in your chest deepened, not from the drink, but from the realization that the night had changed something in you, subtly, invisibly. You would still have busy days, loud days, difficult ones too. But now you knew where to return when the noise grew heavy. You knew how to listen for the rain, even when the sky was dry. You placed the cup in the sink and let the last drop swirl down the drain. The sound small, but certain. Then you turned back toward the window one last time. The world outside was bright now. Children were laughing down the street. A dog barked. Someone called goodbye before closing a door. Life was moving again, endless and imperfect and beautiful. You whispered a quiet promise to yourself, to keep noticing, to keep being grateful, to keep finding warmth in small things, Dot. And as the morning sun touched your face, you smiled, because even without the rain, the peace remained, Dot. As the day unfolded, the world seemed to hum with quiet life. The rain had washed everything clean, and now sunlight shimmered across wet rooftops, catching on window panes and leaves like small drops of gold. You left the window open just enough for the breeze to move through the room, carrying with it the scent of earth, faintly sweet and green. The sound of the city came softly, a door closing somewhere below, footsteps on damp pavement, the distant hum of voices. None of it felt intrusive. It was all part of the same slow rhythm the rain had left behind. Even the ordinary sounds, the clatter of dishes, the turning of a page, the low sigh of wind, carried a kind of gentleness, as if the world had remembered how to speak softly for a while. You sat by the table with your journal open, pen in hand. The paper smelled faintly of ink and time. You weren't sure what to write, only that something inside you wanted to be written. So you began with the simplest thing, a thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the day, to the air, to the rain that had come and gone. Your handwriting moved slowly, looping and careful. You wrote about how the night had felt, how the sound of rain had wrapped around you like a lullaby, how it had made the ordinary seem sacred, the lamp's glow, the warmth of the blanket, the taste of jasmine and honey. You wrote about how peace had arrived quietly, not as a revelation, but as recognition. You paused, looking at the words. They felt small, yet true. Maybe that's all gratitude really was. Not something grand, but something steady. A whisper, not a song. The light shifted through the window as the clouds drifted. You watched a shadow move across the page, slow and fluid. The pen rested in your hand, warm from use. For a long while, you simply watched the sunlight dance between the curtains. The way it painted moving shapes on the wall, Dot, it reminded you of another day, long ago. A childhood afternoon after a storm. You'd been sitting on the floor by a window then too, tracing raindrops with a finger and pretending they were travelers racing each other to the sill. You remembered the warmth of the wooden floor beneath you, the smell of rain-soaked soil. The way time had seemed endless then. You smiled at the memory. Somewhere between then and now, the world had become louder, faster, full of things that chased your attention. But the rain, the simple act of listening to it, had brought you back. To that small child, to that stillness, to that wonder. You wrote another line. Maybe growing up isn't about getting busier. Maybe it's about learning to return to quiet without losing yourself. You set the pen down and ran a hand over the page, feeling the slight texture of the ink. Outside, sunlight touched the rim of your cup, turning its shadow golden. The breeze carried the soft creak of a drying branch and the scent of rain evaporating from the ground. The air felt alive. You closed the journal and leaned back, eyes half closed. The blanket was still on your shoulders, its familiar weight pressing gently against your skin. You thought about how strange it was. This simple object, this piece of fabric, had become a bridge between so many moments, between night and morning, warmth and coolness, stillness and motion. You lifted a corner of it to your cheek and smiled. The softness reminded you that care doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from yourself, in the way you slow down, in the way you notice, in the way you choose to rest instead of rush. The world outside was bright now. Drops on the leaves caught sunlight like beads of glass. A pigeon perched on the ledge for a moment, shaking its feathers before flying off again. You watched it disappear beyond the rooftops and felt a kind of joy you couldn't explain. A joy not tied to any reason, just to being here. You took another slow breath. The scent of rain was fading, replaced by warmth. Sunlight against wood, tea against porcelain, skin against cotton. The day was moving forward, as all days do, but it no longer felt like something to catch up with. It felt like something to walk beside. You whispered again, almost without thinking, "Thank you." And this time, it wasn't to the rain or the room or even the quiet. It was to yourself, for staying, for listening, for letting the world be gentle again. The breeze lifted the edge of the curtain, as if nodding in agreement. The sound of distant laughter floated through the air, soft and fleeting dot, and as the sun climbed higher, filling the room with slow, golden light, you knew this moment would become another memory, stitched into the fabric of peace, one you could return to, again and again, whenever the world grew loud dot by late afternoon. The light had mellowed into amber, that soft, forgiving glow that seems to wrap around everything it touches. The world outside looked freshly painted, each color richer after the rain. The wet pavement had dried in thin silver lines, and leaves trembled gently in the faint breeze, still heavy from the storm. From where you sat, the air felt neither warm nor cool, but balanced, as if the earth itself were taking a deep, contented breath. You sat by the window again, the blanket draped loosely across your lap. The tea was gone now, but the scent of honey still lingered faintly in the cup. You rested it on the table and watched the world move slowly. A bird hopping between railings, a man walking his dog, a woman on her balcony shaking out a small rug. Each movement seemed softer, quieter, as though the rain had reminded everyone to tread lightly. You thought about how strange it was that life could feel different without actually changing. The same street, the same walls, the same routine, and yet, after a night of stillness, it looked new. You realized it wasn't the world that had shifted. It was you. You'd slept deeply, peacefully, and now everything seemed to carry that same calm inside it. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded soothing, like a steady breath keeping time with the rest of the room. It occurred to you that maybe peace doesn't vanish when the day begins. It simply waits for you to notice it again. The blanket's edge brushed against your fingertips. Its texture was familiar now, the soft weave carrying the memory of every moment you'd wrapped it around yourself. It felt like a friend, one that didn't speak but understood. You smiled at that thought, then leaned back in your chair, letting the wooden frame creak softly beneath you. You could hear the faint murmur of conversation from somewhere down the street. A door opened. A laugh drifted up, brief, bright, like the flare of a match in the dusk. Then came silence again, the kind that feels alive, not empty. You took a deep breath and let your eyes wander over the small things, the reflection of the sky on the window, the shadow of a potted plant swaying gently on the wall, the quiet circle of sunlight on the floor. It amazed you how many things had always been there, waiting for you to slow down enough to see them. You thought about how much of life is made up of these unnoticed moments, how easily we rush past them, too busy searching for meaning in the big things, while the small ones are whispering peace right beside us. The rain had shown you that truth. It had asked nothing of you except stillness, and in return, it had given you everything you'd been missing. You reached for your journal again, but instead of writing, you simply opened it and let the light fall across the page. Yesterday's words stared back at you, and though they were simple, a list of small blessings, a few remembered thoughts, they felt alive. You traced a finger along one sentence. Gratitude grows quietly, yes, you thought. It does. It grows in silence, in slowness, in the act of noticing. Outside, a soft wind moved through the trees. You watched as a few leaves loosened from their branches and drifted downward in gentle spirals. There was no hurry in their fall. They simply followed the rhythm of the air, graceful even in letting go. You felt something stir inside you, a calm acceptance, the same kind the leaves seemed to hold. Maybe, you thought, everything has its season of release. The rain lets go of the sky. The leaf lets go of the branch. And perhaps you, too, could learn to let go of old worries, old expectations, old versions of yourself that no longer fit. The thought didn't bring sadness. It brought lightness. Like setting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying. You leaned your head back, eyes half closed, and listened to the distant sound of life. The faint buzz of a scooter passing, the murmur of someone watering plants, the flutter of wings against the sill. Each sound wove itself into a soft tapestry of calm. The sunlight slipped lower, touching the floorboards and the edges of your blanket with a gentle glow. You imagined the light as another kind of comfort, one that didn't warm from the outside, but from within. For the first time in a long while, you felt no need to move, no impulse to fill the quiet. It was enough to be here, to sit, to breathe, to exist. You whispered again, though the words barely reached your lips. Thank you. It wasn't a habit now. It was instinct. The kind of gratitude that doesn't need an object, only awareness. The air shimmered faintly with the last heat of the day. The curtain stirred once more, brushing softly against your arm. And as the light dimmed, you realized something simple and certain, that peace doesn't leave when the rain stops. It stays quietly inside the rhythm you've learned to carry. You smiled, the sound of your breath blending with the hush of evening. The world outside kept moving, but inside, everything was still. Evening slipped in gently, like a hand turning down the dimmer on the world. The golden light of late afternoon softened into blue, then into a deep silvery gray. Outside, street lamps flickered awake one by one, their halos trembling faintly in the damp air. Somewhere far off, a door shut with a quiet click, and then there was only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. You didn't light the lamp right away. The fading daylight was enough, soft and forgiving, brushing the edges of the room in half shadow. You sat by the window again, the blanket wrapped loosely around your legs, and listened to the evening breathe. The air was cooler now, touched with that faint chill that always follows rain. The street below gleamed faintly under the lamps. A thin shimmer of silver stretched across the pavement. A few figures passed. A man with an umbrella, even though the sky had cleared. A woman carrying groceries. A child skipping along beside her. Their footsteps sounded different now. Not hurried, not loud, but quiet and rhythmic. Like part of the same slow melody the rain had left behind. You sipped the last of your tea, now only warm, and set the cup down gently. The sound it made on the wooden table was soft and satisfying. You loved that, the small, honest noises of living. The cup, the wind, your own breath, all small instruments in a song you didn't need to control. Your thoughts wandered, but not far. You thought of all the days that had led to this one, how easily they blurred together, the rush, the noise, the worry. But tonight, none of that felt heavy. The rain had washed something clean, not outside, but inside you. There was a new spaciousness where restlessness used to live. You thought of the phrase you'd written in your journal, "Gratitude grows quietly." You smiled. It had been true when you wrote it, and it was truer now. You felt it everywhere, in the soft weave of the blanket, the faint hum of the night, the whisper of wind against glass. Gratitude didn't arrive like thunder. It grew like moss, silent and patient, covering everything it touched. The lamp flickered softly as you turned it on. Its golden light filling the room once more. It cast a warm glow over the walls, and for a moment, you could almost see the memory of the rain still there. Not as water, but as calm. You let the blanket slide a little higher up your shoulders, the warmth settling gently against your neck. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo. The first stars appeared, faint but steady. You watched them blink through the thin veil of cloud, and it struck you how small they were, and yet how constant light that travels lifetimes, just to reach your window. You thought of all the small things that had carried you this far, tiny kindnesses, fleeting moments, passing faces. They were like stars, too, shining quietly in the background of your life, unnoticed until you stopped to look. The clock ticked softly in the corner. You watched the second hand move and felt no rush in it. You realized that time, too, was gentle when you stopped chasing it. It wasn't running away. It was walking beside you, step by step. You leaned your head back, eyes half closed, and listened to the distant murmur of night. The air smelled faintly of jasmine again. Not from tea this time, but from the garden below. The fragrance drifted up, threading through the open window like a memory of the night before. You thought of the rain and how it had taught you to listen. How it had shown you that peace wasn't something to wait for. It was something to notice. You'd spent so long moving from one moment to the next, always searching for what was next, that you'd forgotten how to stay. But tonight, you had stayed. You had seen the way the blanket folded, the way the light touched the floor, the way quiet could feel like company. You breathed in slowly, deeply, the way the rain had taught you, in rhythm, without effort. The blanket warmed your knees, the light kissed your hands, and the stars outside began to shimmer more brightly. You whispered to yourself, almost inaudibly, "I'll remember this." And you meant it. Not just the rain or the blanket or the quiet, but the way it felt to truly belong to a moment, to be still enough to see how beautiful small things could be. Outside, a gentle wind passed through the trees, carrying with it a faint promise of tomorrow, another day, another chance to listen. You smiled, knowing that you didn't have to hold on to this feeling too tightly. Like rain, like sleep, like light, it would return whenever you were ready to welcome it again. You turned off the lamp, leaving only the glow of the sky. The blanket slid around you like a whisper, and somewhere between the breath of the night and the silence that followed, peace found you once more, not as a surprise, but as an old friend returning home. Night deepened again, the kind of deep that carries no fear, only stillness. The air outside was cool and faintly perfumed with wet leaves and soil. The rain had been gone for a day, but its voice still lingered in the corners of memory, like a song you keep hearing after it ends. You stood for a while by the open window, the same window that had framed so many quiet hours, and looked out into the calm. The street was empty now. The puddles had vanished, leaving faint silver traces on the asphalt that glowed under the streetlights. Above, clouds moved lazily, pale against the navy sky. You could see the faint shimmer of stars again, scattered and delicate, tiny reminders that even after darkness, light always finds its way back. You pulled the blanket tighter around your shoulders. It had become a kind of ritual now, this small act of comfort, this wrapping of warmth around the body, like gratitude around the heart. The fabric was cool at first touch, then slowly began to hold your heat, softening with your breath. You smiled. How something so simple could carry so much peace still amazed you. The room behind you was quiet, dim, waiting. You'd left the lamp on low, its glow brushing against the edge of the bed, the table, the journal. It felt almost alive, the space itself, as if it were breathing with you, matching your rhythm. You realized you'd created something rare, a place where silence wasn't emptiness, but presence. You returned to the chair and sat down, letting the blanket pull around your knees. The clock ticked softly in the background, not counting time, just keeping it company. You rested your hands on the cup still sitting by the lamp. The tea inside had gone cold, but you didn't mind. It was just another small thing to be grateful for. The memory of warmth, the act of holding. You thought about how easily peace can be lost, how it slips away when life grows loud. And yet, somehow, it always returns, through rain, through breath, through the smallest gestures of care. You had learned that peace doesn't come from control. It comes from allowing, from surrendering to what is gentle. The blanket slid higher on your shoulders as you exhaled. The night outside hummed softly, not silent, but balanced. You could hear the wind weaving through the trees, the faint crackle of branches settling, a dog barking somewhere far away. Every sound felt distant yet connected, part of the same quiet tapestry. You closed your eyes for a moment. Inside your chest, gratitude bloomed again, subtle and sure. Not the kind that bursts, the kind that stays. You felt it pulse through you, as steady as the clock, as soft as the light. You thought about all the nights before, the restless ones, the lonely ones, and how far you'd come without realizing it. Sometimes healing doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it just looks like this, sitting quietly in a room you love, feeling whole without reason. You opened your eyes again. The lamp flickered, then steadied, the light catching on the folds of the blanket. You traced them absent-mindedly with your fingertips, small waves of fabric rising and falling like a slow ocean. It reminded you of the sound of rain, its rhythm, its patience, its endlessness. You realized that in some quiet way, the rain had never really left. It had just changed form. It had become breath, stillness, warmth. You, the thought made you smile. It was gentle, certain, complete. You leaned back in the chair and let your gaze return to the window. The stars looked clearer now. Between them, the dark sky stretched vast and calm, a reminder that stillness could be infinite and yet tender at once. You thought about the word enough. It had followed you all night, softly, like a shadow. And now it felt truer than ever. You whispered it aloud, testing the sound of the quiet. Enough. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It simply settled into the air like a sigh, joining the hush of the world. You took one last deep breath. The air smelled faintly of the rain's memory, clean, alive. The blanket's warmth gathered at your chest, your heartbeat slow and steady beneath it. When you finally stood to turn off the lamp, you lingered for a moment, hand hovering above the switch. The glow had kept you company all this time, soft, loyal, golden. You whispered another quiet thank you, then let the room slip into darkness. The only light left came from the stars and the faint glow of the city beyond the window. You climbed into bed, the blanket following like a faithful shadow, and lay there, eyes open just long enough to see the last sliver of light fade dot in that moment. You realized you didn't need the rain to return. You had learned to carry its calm inside you. Your final thought before sleep was not a word but a feeling, a slow, deep wave of contentment that said, "This is home. This is peace. This is enough, Dot." And with that, you drifted into the quiet, where even dreams would move softly, like rain over still water.